Lee, man, thanks so much for coming back on the show here today. You are easily one of our most tenured people of all times on the show, so I love having you on. For somebody that's new to you or your work, could you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike, for having this. Is always fun for me to jump on and talk shop with you. So, but yeah, I'm just a coach. I've been doing kind of different areas of coaching, from the sport coaching avenue to the, sports performance or strength and conditioning for a long time now. The part that I think you and I both enjoy a lot now is coaching coaches and kind of the consulting role. I think eventually you roll into that avenue, because not only I think because it's good to help others because we were helped, but also I think we all need a challenge. And when you start to learn how to coach others and share your model of or your system, it challenges you. You got to be on point, and so that's kind of where I'm at now, and having a good time. And I coaching high school basketball, which is a true passion of mine. I really love it, and the fact that it pays about $1 a month doesn't allow me to do it as a full time. But
yeah, none of us are getting rich off the coach's salary, are we?
Not at all.
Well, and the thing that I love about continuing to have both, right? I love coaching the kids and the athletes, but coaching the coaches is just the leverage that you get from that. It's part of the reason I love coaching kids is because you always get that immediate gratification.
Yeah.
But man, being able to leverage that and then know that coach is going to go then impact 10, 15, 20, 100 other kids.
Yeah.
That's super valuable. And it just makes it feel like, okay, you're really making an impact in all this.
It does, and really that's the name of the game. If we want to help our profession is if you believe in what you do, and which we should, because we've not only have we had results with it, but you put a lot of work into it. It's not, Unfortunately, I had a good talk the other day with Coach Dose about this, because we've all been around long enough now. When we did this stuff before, you could just, YouTube it and come up with you had to figure it out. Like you had to actually apply it, watch for a few weeks and say, okay, it's working, versus, so here's a new drill of the day. And so I think that's what's really rewarding in our area now, is that we've had enough time and now we get to, kind of see it impact others. So it's been, it's been rewarding.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So is anything new since the last time we chatted? I mean, what are you working on over there? I feel like you've always got stuff going on. You've always got stuff going on.
Well, it's funny is I was saying this the other day. I don't know if you've heard me in years past. I was never a big treadmill guy. Like the speed treadmill guys. And I'm not opposed to anyone else using them. It didn't work for what I wanted to do. Yeah. Well, where we live here in Florida, obviously we're going to pretty shortly here. It's going to be 90 for about 5 months. It'll hang there for the whole. Because we're pretty south in Florida, so we get it stays warm. So it's really hard to get kids out. I'll get kids who come to me at 4 or 5 o'clock, and that's the 98-degree time of the day. So anyway, I recently purchased a curved treadmill so that I can maximize the sprint speed programs that I do with my kids anyway, once in progressions. And it's so funny because I've been spending a lot of time of evaluating my athletes on this, and that's kind of been fun for me, because I always run them. I have a little spot outside in front of my house, about 50 yards, marked off every 5 yards, and I can evaluate. But it's hard because I got my iPad on my phone, and they go by me, and now I can't get the angle that I want, where I want it in their stride. Now I can do that. And so it kind of helps me. And then I can bring them out on the floor, because I think they have to get on the ground to feel the ground and feel the movement through space. But the treadmill has been really good. That's kind of a new little toy for me. So
So you're liking that? You're liking that? Because I know there's a lot of people that swear by those, especially cold climates, right? You can't get outside, and that's why Jamaica partly has such a great track team. You could probably be outside year round, but.
Exactly, and that's it. And it's and I still believe in, you got to get outside, you got to run on the earth, you got to move. But for evaluative purposes, like my son really wants to be a good sprinter. He's in track now, but we've never spent time on the pure sprint mechanics. We did sprint work, but we never did a lot, because it just wasn't he didn't want to stay in that area, but now he's seeing it because he's a freshman. He runs track. He's a triple jumper,
Oh,
and
cool.
he does a 4x1. He's the leadoff. And so he sees these upperclassmen, and we run against big schools like Venice and some of these big
Yeah.
schools, and the kids are fast. So now he wants to train it. So I had him on it last night, and we could really focus on his arm gait and positions to help his stride and play more front side. And it's hard for me to do that in open space because he goes by me and I can't talk to him. I can talk to him. I'm right in his ear as he's doing it and relaxing. And it was good. It was he said, he goes, man, it's so much better. So,
oh, that's cool.
We'll see. We'll see where it goes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll have to circle back in 6 months and talk treadmill training then. I love it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Matter of fact, I'll talk while I'm on the treadmill. We'll make it a double.
Double whammy, right? I love it. I love it. Okay. So one thing I want to lead off with today. Well, first off, if you're listening to this show, I'm going to put in the show notes. Lee's been on like 5 or 6 times. That's no joke. I'll put the links to those. But the last show that you and I did, Lee, I don't know if you remember, we really dove in. We talked about like your model for linear acceleration, curved running, top end. So today I wanted to fill in some of those gaps and some of those other areas that I think are really critical to teaching and coaching. And one of those is the plyo step.
Yeah.
Now, you smile when you hear plyo step, and all of us that are of a certain age know kind of the story behind that, but I'm not sure a lot of the younger coaches do. Yeah. So would you mind just telling us a little bit about how you came up with the concept of the plyo step and maybe some of the resistance that you dealt with when you first started becoming a proponent of it?
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, the plyo step falls in this repositioning family of, kind of an elastic step. So when I was a junior in college, it was my first year at Cortland State where I played basketball. I graduated junior college and then I enrolled there. And it was about 1987. And we had our coach that was doing our off-season training. Our head coach was around, but this guy was running it. And he'd put us on the line. He'd make us run on the whistle. He'd say, hold on, wait for he'd blow the whistle. And we'd have to sprint.
Right.
And we did it a couple of times, and twice he blew the whistle the second time and said, go back, do it again. You guys are doing it wrong. So we did it again, and he did it like a second or third time. And I was a captain, and I said, Coach, what do you mean we're doing it wrong? He goes, well, you guys keep stepping backwards before you go forward. He goes, why would you waste time like that? And I'm sitting there shaking my head. I'm like, well, no, we're not. I mean, I'm saying it to myself. I'm like,
right.
So we go, do it again, and he kept doing it. He goes, all right, that's something we got to work on. That got me thinking. I'm like, what's he talking about? Because I was pretty quick, at that stage. I could really go. And I'm thinking, gosh, I'm getting out really fast. I never thought of it. So anyway, over time, it got me to want to watch film of us moving. So I had to watch game film anyway. So I started watching and I think, I'm going to pay attention to my feet when something like that comes up. And I started to notice, I was constantly repositioning my foot from underneath me to behind me, to off to the side, or I opened my hips and I pushed in front to go backwards. I did all these different things. Yeah. And then I said, then I watched other people doing it. And that's what got me watching other film over time. And I started to notice, well, everybody was doing it and it was reactively. So Mike, that was the first time I started thinking, okay, I've heard that before because I played football too. And our coaches would say, stop stepping backwards, go forward, And I'm thinking, gosh, that just doesn't sound right to me. It didn't make sense. So that was the impetus for me to start looking into it. And then as I got watching, the higher level athletes, the pros and the other people that would do it. Of course, we didn't have as much film back then, but I watched whatever I could. I noticed it. And that got me thinking. And then as I learned, as I got in, through college and then after college, I started to study why.
Right.
Why is that? I looked at track and I'm thinking, okay, it doesn't really happen a lot in track, but they do have one foot behind the other. Why would they do that? And then I started to understand the concept of, elasticity and reaction and stiffness. I just started to, and then things that I could not find, I created myself. And that was kind of my mind. I said, well, I'm seeing it. It's happening all the time. I'm not imagining it. So I'm going to put a name to it, and and that's how the plyo step and repositioning and hip turn and all those things came about. So that's where it came from.
Yeah, it's so interesting because when I first started like focusing more on coaching speed with my athletes, and especially this was like 10, 12 years ago, where I really made that like a huge emphasis on what I was doing. I remember I would get blowback from athletes
Oh
because
yeah.
I'm cueing them to do a plyo step, and they're like, no, I was taught not to do that. It's a negative step. I heard all the things. So then it's like, okay. And I remember you told me this. This is, again, probably 12, 13 years ago now. You said, have them drop a ball, or you drop a ball, have
Yeah.
them react to get it and get a video of it and see what they do. And sure enough, I did exactly that. And the guy was like, well, I'll be damned. He was a professional goalie, right? He played 15 years of professional soccer. I'm like, look, I guarantee anytime you have to come off your line, sprint, and attack a ball and grab it, you're going to do that. And he started going back and he was watching. He's like, well, I've been doing this wrong for 15 years.
Yeah.
Or at least in practice, right? I'm like, not in a game, but in practice, he was literally doing it the wrong way.
Yeah, yeah, and that's it. And when you start to think about it, if we reverse engineer this, what's the goal? The goal is to attack an area, or a person, or a ball, or win a race, whatever it is. Well, if we're starting with no real inertia, or inertia, we're still, and we have to change inertia and move.
Yeah.
Well, what are we going to do? We got it. And if I want to go in a particular direction, doesn't it make sense to push in the opposite direction? Well, then you start putting the pieces together. Then us who've learned a little bit more about biomechanics and kind of some of the rules, principles of physics, we say, well, okay, well that one that Isaac was talking about,
right.
our buddy Isaac,
yeah,
he was talking about, that's one right there. That one makes sense. And well, what the second one does too. And the third one actually makes a lot of sense. And then we start looking at, laws of displacement. Okay, well, it applies there too. And so when you start looking at it, you're saying, well, people can argue with me all they want. And I'm not saying I'm the creator of anything. I might have put a title to something, but I didn't create the movement. All I did was say I endorsed it when people weren't embracing that. But if we just look at the science behind it, it's backed. It backs it. So, and if an athlete doesn't use it, it's because they didn't need it. A baseball player does not need to reposition their left foot if they're positioned correctly.
Right.
But we'll watch wide receivers get in their stance and reposition. Even though they're already in a split stance, they'll still reposition often, so we know there's something to it.
Yeah, I love it. So something else that I've heard you talk about, you describe it as pop for the lateral run. And I really like that. I think it's really helpful because this is something that I think is a little bit less intuitive. Like sometimes in games, people can figure this out, but this concept of pop really helps people understand the pushing, but also you got to have somewhere to go. Yeah. Right. A lot of times you'll see people try and push in a lateral run and the other foot's stuck on the ground and then they like fall over themselves. Right. So could you describe how you coach or what the term pop means and how you use that to help coach the lateral run?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So again, I'm really big, and I think my background in phys ed helped me a lot because I had to come up with easy phrases to help my students, and it just transferred into coaching. So pop just simply means push, open, push. So if we were going to move to our right, again, let's go back to logical movement, logical biomechanics and physics. I would want to push with my left because that's behind my body mass and it can push me easier. Well, if the goal is to turn and run, so if I'm just facing sideways, and again, if we use base stealing because that's such a visual one, sideways from the direction I want to eventually go towards second base. If I push with my left, I have to open the front side, and the goal is to become a sprinter. It's to become somebody who's going to accelerate and eventually get as fast as I can until I have to slide. Well, if I push with the left, that's the P, that's the push. Yep. The open serves two purposes. Number one, because we understand these action-reaction forces, the action of that right leg turning outwards, externally rotating through my pelvis, that action actually helps the right leg gain stiffness and a little bit of force. I get reaction from that. So that allows me to get a little bit more push, but it's also setting itself because at terminal push-off of the left, the right leg's job is to continue that momentum that the left leg started. So that's the open turns into a push. So push with the left, open and push with the right. And then now at that point, we should be in like an acceleration starting, running stance. And there's a lot that goes into it if we understand loading. So if I let's say I wanted to be really good at pop and push open push, but if I'm standing there in an athletic stance but my feet are both externally rotated, well, I'm not going to be as good at it because I've deloaded my system because I'm not dorsiflexed. Really hard for me to capture the inside part of my foot. I can't get to my big toe very well because that's the fine, just like it would be when I'm jumping. I get to push off when I jump, same thing laterally on that left foot. So all those things go away. So technically we got to do things right. And then when we include what the arms do, and we got to remember the arms are huge drivers of the entire system. Yes. Those arms, they block, or excuse me, they pull one shoulder through and they pull one shoulder out of the way, which torques all the way down through the body. Yes. And that's what starts my first step when we talk about pinky high on the backside of the first step. So there's a lot to it, but to a young kid, right up. Matter of fact, tonight I've got a young little 6th grade girl that I've been working with, and we talk about pop, and she'll even say back to me, how was the pop on that one? So they're starting to get it. They understand what we're trying to do. Yeah.
Dude, not to go off on a tangent, but I worked with a group of 6th and 7th grade girls because Kendall's in 7th grade, but they do soccer by birth year. And so I did speed camp for them twice a week over the winter. So that's rewarding. Great. So much amazing? Fun. Yeah, I loved it.
That age is so fun.
Yeah. Well, they still know how to have fun, right? And I just feel like this is a great time. You're not in the gym like turning them into power lifters, but hey, let's teach them how to move, how to train, own their own body weight. So anyway, that's super fun. Okay, so kind of a follow-up to that. Do you use the term crossover step anymore? Because one of the things that I found over the years is that when people hear crossover, they assume what probably I would think negatively as instead of push open, right? They're not really opening. They're then on their right leg and literally trying to cross over, which we know is not super effective.
Right.
So do you still use that terminology at all, or did you try and get away from it? Because I do think there's some confusion when it comes to speed training with that.
Yeah. So a couple of things here. I'll tell you a quick story after. So I try not to use it as an introduction when I'm trying to teach the skill of a lateral run.
Yeah.
But if the coach understands the technique, but they use the word crossover, I'll communicate crossover with them.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? So if they actually push open push and they allow that to happen, but they like to use the term crossover, I'm cool with that. I don't write, if I'm writing a post or if I'm talking on like something like this, I'll use lateral run because I don't want them to misunderstand and use, to me, a very outdated and incorrect model, which would be called the crossover, because you're crossing over something fixed. Well, that's not what the human body does when it's in an escape or an attack mode. It doesn't want that. That it just it actually inhibits that. So And then so I had a guy the other day private message me, and it was in response to one of my posts I had put out there. I put like a video on YouTube or not on YouTube, but on Instagram or Twitter, whatever. And he was saying, he goes, so when do you use the crossover versus the lateral run? And I said, I had made a comment kind of saying, well, I really don't. I do this and that. And he goes, well, give me an example when you would. So finally I said, okay, this guy's not getting it. I said, the crossover doesn't exist. It's a figment of your imagination. It doesn't actually exist. I said, what the athlete will do during live competition, it would never represent a crossover, as some people teach. It would be a lateral run. And then he put like a long, gotcha.
Yeah, that's
So,
awesome.
but that was it. I'm like, it doesn't exist, but people are still going to teach it.
Right, right.
Except for
Okay.
skaters. I will say
Yeah.
that. Hockey
Okay.
players do that because of the blade aspect of a
Mm.
blade. They have to do that, but that's a different animal.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay. So I got one other question before we kind of get back to the other stuff. I would love to hear you break down just how you cue an athletic position. And I know,
Yeah.
again, this may seem super basic, but I don't know if this is done very well. And I still see a lot of athletes that I get, and part of it is just movement restriction,
Yeah.
especially when I'm thinking basketball players. But man, their idea of an athletic position, there's no dorsiflexion.
Yeah.
Right? The only reason their knees are flexing is because their hips are so far back.
That's right.
Right? So I would love to hear how you coach and cue just a general athletic position.
Yep. So every time I do an assessment, we take them through that. And so the first thing I tell them is to, assume a wide enough stance so that they could handle if I were to push them and they wouldn't fall over. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I'll go up to them and I'll ask, hey, do you mind if I just kind of push you on the side of your hip there? And they're like, yep. So I'll give them a quick push and I'll usually make them take a step. I said, okay, don't let me take a step. So they'll naturally widen their stance. I said, okay, now
Right.
you can produce and reduce force from this stance. I said, okay, now let's make sure that we're able to come out of this pretty quick. Excuse me. So the first thing I tell them is once they got their stance width is push your knees forward, keeping your heels down. And I'll say, do you feel like your foot is kind of flattening? They're like, yep. So I said, good, I want that. And then I want their knees slightly inside their feet. So there's down and out pressure. Then all I do is I say, have your hips just kind of sit down and gradually move back. Because what happens if you tell them to sit the hips back, like way back, it pulls the shin back. And now the shin becomes vertical. They lost dorsiflexion. So I'll tell them, I said, imagine you're crushing a aluminum can. Just go straight down. So you're as your knees are forward, just squat down. The hips will naturally move back. But I said, I need the coiling effect. So if I get into that coiling, and I'm real big, I think a couple of things have to happen for athletes in their athletic stance is they have to be able to access their quads really well.
Yes.
And not too much of a hip. Like if I'm strength training them and we're doing RDLs or something where I want them to get into their butt, in their hamstrings, in their posterior back and all that, that's different. But I said, when they're going to move quickly and they have to have their eyes up, which means their shoulders are going to usually be up a little bit. They got to access quads. So I'll have them push their shoulders forward over the knees, but still with the eyes and chest up. And that kind of accesses the quads a little bit more. So now when we bounce into it, like we're active, we're not standing still, they feel like, I can feel my quads working on this and I can feel the dorsiflexion. So, and if they struggle with dorsiflexion, that's one of the correctives they do every day is we work on that and activation. And so,
yeah. Oh, I love that.
So,
how many, it's so funny thinking about where our industry has changed and evolved. Like think about 20 years ago when everybody was, they're quad dominant. Quad dominant. I don't know about you, dude. I see so many athletes that can't load and access their quads. They can't use them the way that we would like for them to be able to.
You had the perfect population this winter. That that age group, 6th, 7th grade girls, they fall when they try to decelerate on a single leg on an angle or something quick because the quads can't stop knee flexion and then it pulls the heel up into dorsiflexion with great toe dorsiflexion, or they'll go into planar and then they fall because that becomes a very unstable position. So I'm telling my kids all the time, we never want to neglect the posterior chain. But I said, we got to catch the quads up because I'm not seeing what everybody else is saying. Like, their quads are dominating. I'm like, not my athletes. They're not. So,
no, it's so funny. And the girls, as they went on over the course of the winter, because I had a good group of them for like 3 months.
Yeah.
Some of them are like, what, coach, what? I'm like, ladies, you're building quads. Like they were like, they didn't know, like they thought something was wrong with their knees. And they're like, I'm like, no, girls, you're starting to build quads. They're like, oh, that's cool. But something else you said that's so true as well is I think something else that gets vilified now is the heels,
Yeah.
right? And this will kind of take us into our next question here in a minute. But you talked about, hey, we do want kind of the weight shifted forward. We need to be on like the midfoot, not the toes, but we have to have the heels down. And the way I try and describe that to my athletes is, look, the second your heels come up, you're committed.
Yeah.
You're committed to going in one direction, and that's forward.
That's
so
right.
I was just so glad that you mentioned that. And I know you've talked about that in social media posts, because I think so many people are being taught your heels are bad. Heels are a problem. Don't be on your heels. It's like, no, you kind of need your heels. They are important.
That's right, and it's what loads the system from a linear standpoint. When that happens, it's what ignites this elastic response that we want, because when we're high, so we'll teach a bounce or a pogo or a rebound series, whatever we're calling it, and I'm always telling the athletes, you're so high. And a lot of them, I have one kid that I actually showed a video of his father and his coaching, always saying, you got to get your heels off the ground. And he struggled when he first started with me. And I told him, I said, you have to flatten your feet out. I said, I don't want you riding your heels, but your heels have to tap. Yeah. When your heels touch, that's really critical. And now he's getting it. He's so much cleaner now because we keep working on that. And he's one of the athletes we were talking about off camera. Yeah. And he has knee problems really bad. And think about what it does when your heels are up. Okay. The knees are going to go forward, which isn't wrong, but it's not great when you have no other support system. When your foot's flatter, now you have more support, more stability, and the foot and ankle can actually do more to help up the chain versus they can't. Now take this laterally. Now we're talking about the potential for injury, because I need friction to be my friend on a lateral cut. And what better friction than a full foot contact still being migrating forward towards the ball of the foot. But if I'm way on the ball of the foot, my heel's up, I mean, you know it better than I do, but that ankle is exposed right now. That thing is not going to stop a 200-pound athlete going really fast trying to change direction. So,
No, I love it. I love it. Okay, so one of the things I'd like to talk about is just braking, like deceleration, braking. And it's funny, I feel like there's always like what the practitioners are doing and then what the researchers are doing. Yeah. And I feel like the research is really starting to push this deceleration, braking. You're seeing it in force plates and movement, return to play. What are some of the big keys for you when it comes to teaching deceleration and braking to your athletes?
Yeah. So we'll talk about just kind of linear first, just for a visual more than anything, and then we can talk about other directions if we want. But so if we're just talking about let's say decelerating, not necessarily stopping. So I run 10 yards and you said to me, Lee, you got 10 yards to slow down. Okay. So I have 20 yards, 10 of it's accelerating, 10 of it's slowing down. After that middle portion, that 10 yards, I'm going to start slowing down. What I need to do, and this is what we tell our athletes, you have to access entry into the ground with your heels. Because I need, and I teach my kids, even my young kids that I teach them what casting means, because I do a lot of drills where I'll tell them, hey, make sure you cast your lower leg on this drill. Or, if I work with different types of jumpers, long and triple, and that's an important skill. So we'll talk about allowing the lower leg to cast out in front, heel touches, and that initiates the braking action, okay? Because the foot's hitting way out in front of my center of mass. Now I start to access, again, quads and then hamstrings and glutes and everything turns on. So that's one of the first things. We want to hit the heel. We want to start to drop the center of mass behind the knee. So if my right foot is landing and I've casted, okay, and that right knee is sitting a little bit behind my heel, my right heel, I want my hips to start to sit behind that knee a little bit, which is telling me my center of mass is dropping. Okay. And that allows me to just get closer to the ground and access a little bit more deceleration demand. Then the other part of that is we have to be able to decelerate our upper body, because the upper body, if we stay really tall in deceleration, well, my cast has to be even further, but that's not necessarily a good thing.
Right.
So, in order to reduce how far I have to cast and stay connected, I bring my shoulders forward and I kind of sit down. Just picture a wide receiver breaking on a route, right? They start to
Yeah.
sit, they drop their shoulders a little bit, and then they'll make a break. So we walk them through it. We'll literally just walk them to the beginning of my garage, out the door, and then they stop, and then we'll jog it, and then we'll go through it, and they'll do it with both legs, and we just walk them into that pattern of feeling your body being stopped or slowed
Right.
down, and then eventually stop. So, any comments on that, Mike? Because I know that was a lot. But
No, no, no. That's great. That's great. I would love to just hear, okay, now what are the various ways that you teach that? Right? Because I feel
yep,
like there's so many ways, right? There's a jump
yep,
stop, a lunge stop. I know you've talked about glide stop. So maybe talk about
yes.
just where that fits in, or like maybe a progression that you would use to help them better understand this.
Definitely. So the first thing we do with the athletes on something like this that I'm teaching. So even if it was you who's
Yeah.
an accomplished mover, strong, good, but if I was teaching you a new deceleration move, I would put a band around you, and it's what
Yep.
I call hit the position. It's the first phase of a three-phase deceleration system. We call it hit the position, and then eventually we control it, and then we have to own it, where I'm pulling you into the
Right.
deceleration move. So this first, I just put a band around you and I'll say, Mike, I want you to jog 5 yards and I want you to do this deceleration pattern. And then eventually what I'm going to do is we're going to do the exact same thing, but you're not going to decelerate until I say decelerate, or I'll clap. When you hear me clap, then you start the process of decelerating, and I'll give you bandwidth of how far you can go before you have to stop. Then what we'll do is we'll go this, let's go back to that 20 yards. 10 yard is the start of the stop. But then I'm going to say, okay, now you only have 5 yards. And you got to stop within that 5 yards. And I want maximal speed in that first 10 yards of acceleration, then stop. So I'm building that ability. So we'll
Right.
do that with what we call a lunge stop. Sounds just like it is. It's
Yep.
one leg in front, lunge. Then we'll go to a jump stop, which is a symmetrical 2-foot stop. Then we'll go, and the heel entry concept just doubles. So a
Yeah.
lunge stop is one. The knee of the floating leg, the back leg, sits under the pelvis so I don't incur extension of the back.
Yep.
And then we do a double leg. And then we go an offset, which for you and I is really important because that's a closeout
Close
technique
out.
in basketball. That's
Yep.
our 2 or 4-step approach. Then we do a offset, and then we have an angular stop, which would be if you and I were teaching a shuttle run. We run to the
Yeah.
line, we plant our foot, we run back. So we teach a shuttle, and then we have a lateral stop, which is a shuffle to a stop, and then the rest of them become retreating, backwards. So then that
Yeah.
would be a different technique. So those are kind of the modalities. Those are the things we'd use. We have bands, we have different ways. For kids who maybe are having a little bit of trouble, I'll bring the floor up to them and we'll put a box, and I'll put the box the long way. So
Yeah.
rather than it being 18 inches wide, it's 24 inches long, and they got a lot of room to decelerate on it, but it brings it up to them. So there's definitely several techniques we can use to help them feel that pattern. Then it becomes reactive. Yeah.
Okay. Now I got to ask, when did you start playing around with the bands for resistance and like momentum control?
Gosh, that was a long time ago. When I had my speed academies in New York, we did it way, way back in '94 when I first opened up our first facility. Jen and I, we hadn't had kids yet. I had bands that I used to make. A company called Speed City used to make these long, long, long bands. Scott Phelps and Randy Smythe, and they had these long bands, but they were pretty expensive for me back then. So I learned how to make them. I made these. I would buy wholesale these long bands, and I would make these belts and all. And that's when I would do it. Yeah. And, I had a ski group. I had ski instructors, ski patrol, and I started to do a lot of it with them because that helped them with handling moguls as they ski. So I started to do a lot of it. Then I would pull them, and then I would assist them, and then I would go body weight. And that's how the 3 phases developed over time. That's how it started. And then as I started to put my system together, I said, okay, I got to organize this better. And that's kind of where it came from.
Dude, I can't tell you how powerful that concept is. It's like, I know you realize this now. It's such a basic concept, but I use it with my young kids
Yeah.
to teach them the fundamentals. I
Yep.
teach it with, or I use it with a lot of my pros
Yeah. Oh,
that have
yeah.
been taught maybe incorrectly,
Yep.
right? I use it every day in return to play,
Yep.
right? Because you want to help them, you want to get them back to these sports specific movements, but you need to control momentum
That's
where
right.
they don't feel comfortable exploding or stopping yet. It's just such a powerful tool, and you can use it with basically everybody that comes through your
Exactly.
facility.
And you can even, let's say you got a pro that you're working with and he's already in great shape, everything's good, but he wants to warm up.
Yeah.
Well, do level one first or phase one. Just put the band
Yep.
on, and it could be attached to your wall or squat rack. And he does a couple reps of jump stops, offsets.
Yeah.
But he's taking, depending on how big the band is and how far, he could be taking 30% off his body weight. What a
Yep.
comfortable way to lubricate,
Yeah.
and get ready to
Absolutely.
move. Yeah, then take it off and then go.
Yeah.
And so you can do all three phases with some athletes, as what you said, and we talked off camera. I've got so many knee pain athletes right now that I'm working with. It's a godsend for me to be able to get them to they feel like, gosh, I'm doing the same movements that I need to be able to do, but it doesn't hurt me because I'm taking the weight off them. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of value to it.
Yeah. And when we had this discussion years ago, and I did not think about it at that time because I was a much younger man then. But you made the comment of this is a lot of this stuff, whether it's bands or throwing medicine balls, a lot of this stuff is great for your older like athletes.
Yeah.
As I've had guys now 10 to 15, some of them 20 years playing professionally.
Sure.
Dude, there's a lot of miles on that body.
That's right.
So they want to, like you said, they want to hit the positions. They want to feel the right things, but they don't want to feel beat up from the stuff we're doing in the gym.
That's
So
right.
it allows them to save those reps for the practice field or for the game where it really matters.
Exactly. And you can, just like it says, they can hit the position and you can coach them up because you can
Yeah.
say, well, you're not hitting the position. You're
Right.
not. So you can actually teach them, but it's doing it and it's saving them reps because you're taking some weight off them.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
it. Okay. This is just a wonderful concept that I would love to hear you explain here. Talk to me about creating space versus taking space away.
Yes. That's really, you know what? That's the essence of most sport, really.
Yeah.
When we think about it, the sport that's competitive in the sense of, even track sprinters, they start in an area, they're going to escape that space and they're going to attack a new space. And it just depends on the distance of the race. Basketball players, they are constantly attacking new space and escaping old space. So it does a few things. When you use that phraseology or those terms, it instantly gives an athlete context because we talk offensively all the time to football players or basketball or soccer. You got to attack space. There's a gap. Go attack the gap, right? We say
Right.
that all the time. But defensively, we don't use that. Well, I do. I'm always saying, well, you just got beat or faked. Now you got to escape as quick as you can, and that's when it allows me to really dig in and teach because
Yeah.
they're like, well, how do I do that? Okay, here we go. Well, now we're going to start. And then so we teach them to escape that space with the technique that's most valuable at that time. And then how do we transition, which we call linking skills, from this escape pattern, which initiates my takeoff. Then what do I transition into? Well, that's the link. And then I go into whatever finishing skill I'm going to use to attack new space. So let's give an example. I just closed out on a three-point shooter. He shot faked and he drove by me. Okay, my initial escaping skill is a hip turn. I'm going to hip turn. Now I'm going to use that concept of push, open, push. And I'm going to begin to get into an acceleration, probably with a lateral run. And then eventually it leads into whatever other skill I'm doing based on what the player does. Maybe he does a finishing move. Now I'm just trying to take off and catch him. So you can really take this concept of escape space and attack new space and replace those words with meaningful skills. So rather than escape space, I'm going to say, okay, you're going to use a hip turn, lateral run, into an acceleration or a jump. Maybe it's a takeoff
Right.
or whatever. So you can play with the words as to what, and that gives the athlete context. And you and I, as practitioners, now can say, well, okay, when you do a hip turn, be careful because you're bailing out. Bailing out means the shoulders sit above the hips versus staying in front of the knees. You name it. We can start getting picky at that point. And at your level, with some of the stud athletes you work with, that's what keeps them from sitting on the bench or getting a better contract, or
Absolutely.
you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
when you're working with your 12-year-olds, what's the worst that can happen? They're going to
Right.
go home and have cake anyway. So
Right. Yeah. But it's a great way to think about things because, again, I just love things that universally work.
Yeah.
Right. And you can, hey, with the 12 and 13-year-old girls, hey, look, I'm just helping them educate and understand, like giving names to things that they are doing on the field.
That's right.
Or that they should be doing. I'm helping them understand the game. Like, hey, when this happens in a game and somebody gets past you, you need to close that space down. How do we do that? Then with the pros, you can have these more like insightful discussions of, okay, you closed out. Unfortunately, the play doesn't always end there.
Yep.
It would be great if everybody, you close out and they take a shot and then you go up, but it doesn't always finish the play. So just like these universal pieces of language that you can take across the board and help people better understand the game or the movements that you're trying to teach them.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? The phrase of escape and attack space is so much more important now in today's athletics than it was, back when I played. Because we'll take especially if we're talking basketball, because you and I work a lot in that sport. If I would have caught a pass from you, 30 years ago, I'm catching, I'm shot faking maybe twice, I'm jabbing, I'm doing rocker step, and the defender's sitting in front of me, kind of waiting to see what I do. You don't do that anymore. Now it's 0.5 decision. I'm catching, shooting, catching, moving, catching, driving. So the defense has to have that ability to quickly escape and attack space. As where years ago, okay, I could use a offset jump stop or a glide step, off into your lateral movement. We don't do that anymore. That's not how offenses are run. So our coaching has to adapt to the strategies we use, and escaping and attacking space are really important concepts.
Yeah, I love it. So one thing that I've noticed as I have coached just more and more athletes over the years is that sometimes inevitably I would love to have all basketball players in a group, all volleyball players, all softball. Never works like that.
Right.
Like it never works like that. Just reality, people's schedules. So one thing that I found, and I think this happened probably the most around COVID, because I would just get, first off, nobody had anything else to do on the tail end of that. And everybody just wanted to be out of their house. So they'd all come to the gym. And so it would not be uncommon to have a basketball player, a volleyball player, a softball player all in a group. And what I started to realize is like the speed stuff doesn't have to change all that much.
No.
And I'm sure this is probably like common knowledge to you, but as I'm going through this, I just start explaining to them. They're like, well, how can we all work in the same group? How is this not, or how are we going to make this sport specific? And I would say, look, probably the most specific element is how you finish the play.
Yeah.
Right. And so then I started to talk about, okay, in basketball, you're going to shuffle and then maybe you're going to, transition out of that. In volleyball, you're going to shuffle and then you're going to receive a serve or dig a ball. In softball, you're going to shuffle and field the ball and then turn and throw. So I would love to hear your thoughts just on this. It's probably not the best question. I realize that. But like, how do you relate that to people? Because we still get the sports specific people out there. But you and I both know so much of athletic movement is athletic. It just ends in different plays on a field.
Oh, without a doubt. And I'll tell you, all the questions you've asked so far are so important and so technically sound, and they'll resonate differently with different ages and abilities of coaches like us. Some young people, they might not get it yet. Older people are like, that's what I needed to hear. That question you just asked might be the most important for the masses, because when I opened up my speed academies, we trained up to 12 athletes per hour. And we didn't designate. We didn't have, okay, this is the lacrosse hour and this is the volleyball. It was everybody. So I learned way back then, because even back then I was kind of teaching the concept of 7 patterns. I just didn't know it at the time, but we did all those patterns all the time. And I used to say to the athletes, I'm like, okay, because I got to know all the athletes really well, and I knew their favorite sport. I had a lot of soccer. Lacrosse and field hockey was huge up in the Northeast.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the baseball, softball, and, tennis was really big too, and basketball. So anyway, I would say to the athletes, I'm like, okay, here's the skill we're going to do. I want you all standing sideways. And what we're going to do is I'm going to initiate a straddle jump with you guys. You're going to straddle your feet back and forth. And when I say go, you're all going to take off and accelerate quickly 4 or 5 yards. And I'd mark it off in my facility, and we'd do that. And I'd say to them, okay, you softball players right now, for you guys that are lefties and we're moving this way, you've got to be able to have an inside hand fielding action on this towards the end. And you basketball players, you got to do this, or my, tennis, finish the swing. So I would say to them, your ability to win this race doesn't have anything to do with your sport. It has to do with the quickness of your execution of this skill. And that's a lateral run. And so they got it. So they didn't question me because I spoke to each one. Like, let's say, Mike, you were a rugby athlete, and I might use some kind of rugby phraseology to help you understand what it is that I'm looking for you to get out of this drill. So it created a really cohesive unit, but they all understood that I was looking out for them, for this. And even at the end of the day, I knew it's still general. It has to be general because I don't have tennis rackets or lacrosse thing, and we're not playing that sport. So we just kept it very general, and I tried to get them to understand you still have to be able to move linear, lateral, vertical, retreating, and rotationally really efficient. And they got it. They understood it. So you can have a lot of fun with the different groups and teach them different skills within it of their movement. And the other part, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
I would say to my softball, baseball infielders, I would talk about their stance as contact was happening versus like a volleyball middle. If I had a volleyball, because we had a lot of volleyball players that we would get from this school. Queensbury High School was a very big, strong high school in volleyball. And I told them, I said, well, your stance is going to be a little different because you got to come out of this potentially vertical block and then be able to move laterally. And I said, that's why this straddle is so important to you, as where my basketball players, their stance was a little different to them. So I didn't always unify everybody's stance. I gave them reasons why their stance might be a little different.
No, I really like that. Yeah, and it's been cool because Kendall has never played tennis. This is her first year playing tennis.
Oh, cool.
And so after going through like speed camp, and she's obviously done stuff with me over the years, but she's like, oh, so I lateral shuffle here a lot more than I do in soccer. I'm like, yeah, absolutely, right? So now like some of that general training, she's starting to see, oh, in this sport, this is really important. So again, you and I both know like the general aspect of this, we can't, especially with young kids, we shouldn't get too far away from it. And hey, man, you just never know when you're going to need some of this stuff. So
that's right. And the sport drives the positions, the postures, and the executions of the general skills itself. Tennis players move differently than basketball players because of the net cord. Volleyball players move different based on front line, back line. Soccer players move different based on foot being the primary contact point versus hands for most sports. So the sport will drive it anyway. And if we just give them the general abilities, they can specialize it when they're at those practices.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, kind of pulling things together here. Or actually, I kind of want to go on a little bit different tangent here just for the last little bit. And you and I talked before the show for probably 15, 20 minutes. We probably should have actually recorded that. And maybe we could have just done that whole show, but we'll do that for another time.
Yeah.
You posted something the other day, and you talked about this idea of, there's a standard assessment process that I use, but now like another factor that I'm having to take into account is pain avoidance and overuse injuries. And we are kind of lamenting this fact, like nobody we get anymore is coming to us unscathed.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about that. Talk to me about why you think we're seeing that and what you're trying to do, or maybe how it's changed how you train people as
Right.
a result of, just what we're seeing with the kids we train these days.
Yeah, yeah, no, this is really big now. So, of the probably, 8 of the athletes that I'm training right now, and it's because I finished basketball season, I couldn't do much with them. And now that basketball is done, I'm working with, quite a bit of athletes. And I would say every single one of them has pretty high level pain. Like they come in, I can see it when they walk,
Yeah.
to my garage. I can tell they're sore and they're hurting. And a lot of it's knee pain. I got an athlete that's coming off ACL about 6 months now, and I even have a Tommy John athlete, a pitcher that I'm working with now. And so the one thing that I try to do with them is, like, I had a really good high school basketball player the other day. He's a good sized kid. He's 6'2", 190 pounds, very good athlete, one of the top players on their teams, leading scorer, and tough kid. His dad actually was a professional football player. So, the kid's got some genes
Yeah, the
there.
genetics are there.
Yeah. And he's only a freshman, but he comes in, and I always say, where are you? 0 to 10, 10 being the worst. He goes, I'm an 8, 7, 8 today. I said, okay, let's get to work. So we did a heck of a workout. I mean, he was like, Dad said, holy cow, and we never once ran, never once jumped, never once, but we did everything that supports those movements. So we did a ton of variations and vibratory peel-off movements that mimic change of direction and upper body work. We did stuff like that. But to lead it off, Mike, I spend more time now carving out ankle space, making sure that they have the ability to dorsiflex, which gives them a little bit of freedom. And then we go into activating hips like crazy, because most of their hips are turned off in the course. So we do a lot of that. And then we do some analgesic work, like, it's, isometric holds or Spanish squats or TKE type versions of variations. It's about 15 minutes into the workout with this young man who's, dealing with knee pain on both sides. One knee's a little bit worse than the other, but he's got both. So we did all these exercises, and then he started to say, he goes, I'm like about a 3 now. He goes, I can move pretty good. So I still didn't do anything to exacerbate it. We just started doing more exercises that kept consistent tension. So slide board. I would put him on my slide board, but what I did is I put a band around him, and I got on one side of the slide board. So imagine let's say I was on the side that his right leg had to push off with. So he'd push off hard against the band and go all the way out. And he didn't bang into the other side because I had the band on him. And then he would just kind of slide back to me, and we would do 10 reps on that side, turn him around 10. So we were working power, but because it's really kind of a closed chain exercise because the foot's in contact the whole time. Yeah. I said, how are you? He goes, I'm great. He goes, I'm exhausted, but I said, I feel really good. So we did that. And then, we just did some other things that helped train acceleration, change of direction, deceleration. I did, how you get in like a kind of like a single leg RDL, but the other foot's down in the back. So kind of like a kickstand. And I had them pull on not a cable, I have tubing. And we did some stuff like that. So we was working deceleration and reacceleration out of it. So we did a lot of things like that, got a great training session. And at the end, I said, be honest with me, where are you? He goes, I really don't feel anything right now. He goes, That's awesome. Feels great. And he left, and his dad was happy, because he goes, he's always hurting. And that's kind of the approach we take with him. I got a couple kids tonight, brother and sister, same thing. I actually go to the same school as this other athlete. Same thing. They're here with me, so we'll follow a little different approach with them because they're different. But so I think to get them to avoid the pain so we can still train and they feel good about the training session is really important. And that's what we're able to do. Yeah.
So, okay, to kind of bring this full circle, because you and I, we have so much of this right now, right?
Yeah.
Like, return to play is such a hot button topic. In fact, I'm doing like an entire presentation on it next weekend up in Fort Wayne, because I just think more people need to be talking about this and like having a more unified approach versus This is what the PT does, and this is what the strength coach does. This is what the skills coach does. I would love to hear this from your lens. Like, what are some of the big things that we need to be focusing on, or maybe that we're missing when it comes to return to play with regards to like speed and power development? Because that's the last piece, right?
Yes.
So what are we missing out on there?
Yeah. So first of all, I think one of the things that I've kind of, this is a full circle effect for me, because way back when I first started training, I was very big unknowingly on capacity. Like I always wanted my athletes in great shape. And because that's what I knew. It was easy for me to do. And then as I started learning more about speed and explosiveness and power and how the neural drive and how the nervous system accepts speed when it's rested, then I kind of the pendulum swung maybe a little bit too far, and I was really focused on all that. Now I'm starting to see a lot of the issues we deal with. Kids go from sitting to 100 miles an hour, and they never hit 35 miles an hour anymore.
Right.
And we used to play 35 miles an hour for hours all day. So we had tremendous capacity, tremendous, if we get little, nitpicky tendon, viability. We had great just stamina in our system. Our joints were really healthy. We don't have that anymore because kids go right from nothing to 6 games of AAU or travel sports. So I think what we have to do regarding this, speed and power element to this is we have to understand what's really important when it comes to the first part of generating speed, whether it's speed in a vertical jump, speed in accelerating, speed in lateral movement, whatever. What happens in the middle phase of that, so the cycles, the gait cycles or that, and then what happens at the end of it, so the deceleration component of it. And I think if we look at those and we realize these athletes are favoring or not actually doing the skill the way it should be because they're favoring, first of all, I think that's what we have to make sure we mitigate, or we control that. But Mike, I think we can get tremendous value if we spend time on things that drive our nervous system, create action-reaction forces or ground contact forces, but we avoid the constant pounding that these kids are getting anyway because of their travel sports. So, for example, I can do a split stance position landmine press very explosively, which gives me the foot drive of a cycle foot drive, a staggered foot drive. That's going to simulate maybe a plyo step takeoff or a staggered. I can do reps like that, and I can simulate that and help the athlete, and then maybe throw some live movement reps in there. But I can get some of my volume in a closed stance manner, but I'm still simulating that dorsiflexion, the kinetic chain through hip extension, kinetic chain through arm action, maybe doing a different type of exercise like that. So I try to do, that's why I throw a lot of medicine balls with either a pop concept or a step concept or something of that nature, because I can mitigate some of the forces these kids are always going through, still get the total volume I want, but half the volume isn't real pounding on their body, but it's neurally driving.
Man, I love that. Okay, so you just made me think of this thing that I do. I like to say it's lower body work that's masked as upper body work. Case in point, you talked about the half kneeling landmine, right? So somebody sees a landmine, they think, oh, that's an upper body exercise. Until I put you in a split stance and make you hold that position. So instead of maybe, in your case, you're talking about doing it explosively, I'll do that. But sometimes I'll also do it in, say, like a low cable row.
Yep.
So now they have to hold that. So now we're working on braking, right? Everything's trying to pull them forward. They have to own their center of gravity, stay back. And they think, again, oh, I'm rowing. Until they do about 8 to 10 reps. And they're like, oh, my God, why are my quad and butt so tired? Yeah. Because we're using, it's like we're infusing more isometrics into the program.
That's right.
And I think that's something that, anytime we can infuse some of that stuff is incredibly valuable. The other thing that I think can also be beneficial in this time is, look, a lot of these kids, when we get them, they haven't been taught the right things.
That's right.
Right? So that's kind of one of the things that I talk about when we're in a return to play is like, hey, look, we've got X amount of weeks or months. Let's use this time to actually make you a better mover. make you more economical, more efficient, so
Yep.
that hopefully when you get back out there, not only are you pain free, but you're moving better, you feel better, and you're faster to boot. So I think it's all in how
Exactly.
you frame it, right?
It is too, and it's making sure the athlete feels engaged as an athlete,
Yeah.
but they're getting the best of what they need. You know, we're
Yeah.
giving them everything that we know they need, but yet you're still, I've got this girl that's 6 months ACL, post ACL, and I do a lot of things that make her compete for the drill. And that's what
Mm.
keeps her really engaged. But yet it might be something as simple, like I did a drill with her the other day. So imagine this. She has her hands on the wall and her right foot, excuse me, it was her left foot because it's a right ACL. Left foot was on this 2-inch box. I'm famous for
Yep.
using these little 2-inch box. It was
Oh, yeah.
on that. And then the right foot was way behind her. So imagine doing a wall run, but she wasn't doing a wall run. She was just posted that way. Well, the back leg, she had to bring it forward to tap the box and then back and put quick pressure on it. So what I was trying to do and I was explaining to her is, yep, we got to deal with the knee, but your Achilles and your feet haven't had any kind of quick pressure
Mm.
for a long time. So I was putting her into a plyo step drill or a
Yep.
repositioning step, and she just tapped with about half her weight. And I said, you've got 5 seconds to get as many reps as you can. And so she's firing it,
Yeah.
and that leg's hitting quick behind her in a dorsiflex position. And
Yeah.
we repped it out, and she goes, "Oh my gosh!" She goes, "Even my butt, I felt." I said, "I know, because you're not using that." But she could feel that. She could feel her foot. So, but to her, it was competitive, and she likes
Yeah.
that. She's a competitive soccer player, So
Yeah.
yeah.
I love it, man. I love it. Well, Lee, I could always just harass you for hours on end. I truly appreciate you coming on.
This is fun.
Man, always so much fun. Where can my listeners find out more about you and all the great work you're doing?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. This was so much fun, as always. If they go to anything at Lee Taft for social medias, they'll find me, and I try to respond and try to frustrate people sometimes to create conversation. And then if they go to leetaft.com, they can learn more about kind of where I'm at or what's going on. So that's kind of what's going on.
I love it. And one last thing before I let you go. Do you have a seminar coming up? Am I correct?
Yeah. So Coach Robert Dos Remedios and myself, June 8th, we're going to be out in California at University of Laverne College. And we're going to do a full day. I'll do a morning of speed and he'll do an afternoon. And so that'll be a lot of fun. We're looking forward to that. And actually next week I'll be up in your neck of the woods, up at a college in Indiana.
Nice.
Yeah, just up the road from you there. Working at the college for a couple of days, so a basketball team.
That's awesome, man.
So
that's awesome. Well, I'll make sure I get links in the show notes to you, the seminar. If you're in California, obviously, huge fan of Lee. Definitely get out there if you can and see what him and Dos are up to. So, again, Lee, thank you so much, my man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. I always appreciate it.